Okay, welcome to this next segment. We're now going to talk about the basic combat mechanics in Armored Knights Guderian Crosses the Meuse, as well as Armored Knights Case Blue Don Bend, for example. So, if you'll recall, I've left the old mechanics and I have the new mechanics. So, let's talk this through. So the first thing to know is that the terrain effects are still there. They have been detailed out quite a bit more so that there are effects upon attacking armor, infantry, and artillery and air combat strength, depending on what the terrain is. Currently, we are looking at just simply clear terrain. It makes the easiest example, I think. So for clear terrain, we see that that the attacking armor combat strength is multiplied by 2. There are no changes to other units here, and there are no terrain-based combat die roll modifiers. Note that these die roll modifiers apply to both the attacker and the defender, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So as you can see, I have taken the ×2 right here for armor, noted again right here. So you see some other modifiers that are going on here. Let's talk about those. There are non-terrain combat modifiers, and then there are combined arms die roll modifiers. You can see the combined arms summary here, and for the defender here. The critical thing in either case is that we must have 2 stacking points of infantry. That's 2 companies of infantry, realistically. And we're going to assume that we have infantry. Also, we're going to assume that we're doing what's called a hasty attack. Okay, there are 2 types of attacks in the new Armored Knights rules. There are hasty attacks and there are deliberate attacks. Hasty attacks take place during the operations phase. They are rather ad hoc, rather in the moment, right? Literally not deliberate. It's like, oh, it's a meeting engagement, or it's a target of opportunity, right? Rolling down the road, you find somebody and you immediately move out of line of march and attack them. So hasty will give you a 0.75 modifier to all units involved, including air. So let's talk about this. So I'll just talk through, I think, these modifiers. So in an apples to apples way, we have light anti-aircraft artillery gets a +1 die roll mod. So these are DRMs. None of this percentage stuff. So when you're looking at the map, you can say, hey, I have light anti-aircraft present in this stack. They're going to be present in this attack. I get a +1. Very easy to think through, right? No multiplication particularly involved. You do have to keep in mind the hasty attack multiplier, but it's always the same throughout the German operations phase, throughout the Soviet or French operations phase. It's always 0.75, everybody. That also includes incoming artillery. Again, it's the idea that, okay, we're not firing on a registration. We don't have, the forward observers are just, they're kind of doing a hip shoot. They're calling in something to TRP-1, right? It's not like they've registered a barrage or had a lot of time to set up. They are acting in the moment. So artillery also gets the 0.75 modifier. All right. Military intelligence, I'll come back to that. Armor, aside from the aforementioned terrain modifier, remember this is terrain modifier, terrain effects chart. Armor gets a +1. Engineers get a +1, and we have close air support. In this case, it's a Stuka. Stukas get a +1. If I brought 2 Stukas, I would get +2. That's rather nice. Each of these categories, each of these kinds of units has a +2 DRM max. So if I wanted to bring 3 light anti-aircraft units, I would just simply get +2. Adding more adds to the combat power, but not to the die roll modifiers. So in summary, we wind up with ×2 armor due to the terrain and a +4 die roll modifier. Now the defender can get their own die roll modifiers. They're not as extensive. And if you look at the non-terrain combat modifiers, we still have a few, a number of which attacking at night, routed defender, hasty attack, which we've already spoken of, as well as regimental integrity. Most of these should be familiar to players of the earlier games, but this is pretty much it. Get your modifier from the terrain, get your modifier from this short list of 5. That's all the multiplication you need. It does stack, right? So a routed defender, well, one, if you're routed, you're not attacking, so let's ignore that. A hasty attack at night is 0.75 times 0.25, right? So it's like 0.375, if I recall correctly, something like, no, it's worse than that. 0.75, and anyway, it is a rather small number. So, yeah, 0.75, small. So, okay, so those are fairly big differences, right? The upshot of it, there is an armor quality ratings that gets into some considerable details. Also, the charts, which are very nice, by the way, they detail out, well, they summarize the combat procedures, they summarize how to read the combat results over here. There is also artillery and air target density modifiers, but these are all relatively predictable. As you become comfortable with the game system, you're going to know, hey, I am attacking a single company in the clear, and so I know that I'm going to have basically 0.5, right? My artillery is going to be cut in half. My air is going to be cut in half in terms of the attack strength, because it's only one company, and in this game the hexes are 1 kilometer, so they've got a lot of room within that 1 kilometer hex to bounce around a bit. The more density you get, the more effective your air and artillery can be, because they're starting to step on each other. They're not as dispersed as a smaller unit could otherwise be. All right. Let's talk about the attacker combat results and the defender combat results. So I'm going to note a couple of interesting, 3 things, I think. We'll see how long that 3 list lasts. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about attacker combat proficiency. There is very important differences between green units, line, veteran, elite. In the Guderian Crosses the Meuse, there are no conscripts. That's what these folks are. But you notice that for every increase in the relative level of experience of the unit, you get effectively a +2 die roll modifier. I can tell you that in Guderian Crosses the Meuse, most of the French are green. Some are line, but most are green. The Germans, for their part, the Panzer divisions are veteran, right? So they have a permanent +4 advantage. And there are some units, Stukas, for example, are considered elite, as well as the infantry regiment Großdeutschland. It's considered elite, so it gets further things. All right. Another thing I will point out is that these tables are laid out somewhat asymmetrically, right? So consider this 0.25 to 1, the leftmost column over here. Basically, as you go down the table, as you get a higher die roll, you get increased results, right? You get more productivity out of the attack for the attacker. Consider, same thing. If you get a lower die roll as the defender, you get increased productivity. It just works out that way. And the die rolls, the die roll modifiers are set up to reflect that. So positive die roll modifiers with positive results for the defender typically are going to be negatives, right? For the attacker, they're going to be positives. All right, that's 2 things. The last thing I'll note is that, okay, hopefully we can see these. Okay, so there's a new thing here. If you're familiar with the old Armored Knights system, you'll see these things. These are retreats. This is a 1-step loss plus a retreat, 2 retreat, right? No surprises so far. Then what is this /RT? That is a route check. Morale plays a big part now in the Armored Knights combat system. And so this is a route check at -1, or actually it's at +1 given the mechanic, +2, +3, right? You really don't want to be down here. You're having a bad day officially. I'll leave the A's and B's and C's. They only they only really apply during deliberate attacks, and they give additional advantages to the attacking units that happen to roll them up. You can make additional attacks, additional advances after combat, that sort of thing. Note, we have the same thing going on here, right? If the attacker is really making a, let's say if they're launching an attack with a low percentage shot, think Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid versus the Bolivian National Guard. Let's say Butch and Sundance are going to have a pretty bad day of it, right? So, and note also how Butch and Sundance, they may actually be able to pull one out if they are fighting against the Green Bolivian National Guard, well, the French in this case. But there's always going to be some kind of negative impact, even for green or conscript troops, almost guaranteed, if you're making a foolish attack at low odds. But that's what we've got going on here. So we've got a simplification in the basic combat mechanics here, and it makes the combat a lot more predictable, because you can look at just a handful of modifiers. You can say, oh, well, I know that my armor is more effective in the clear. It's less effective in the woods. And that is reflected here, right? This is woods. This is clear ×2. Woods, even. So, okay, it's not horrible in the woods. If you get into rough terrain, 0.5. If you're in the mountains, it's 0.25 for armor. And this 3-note, they can only attack along a road or a railroad. You can't just go in an arbitrary direction with armor. In fact, you'll notice as well that for track, it's not applicable unless you're on a road. Much fun. Okay, well, that concludes this segment. I am going to talk about a new mechanic that has brought in. It is an optional rule in Armored Knights Guderian Crosses the Meuse, but I've been using it for all of my attacks, for all of my combat in the game I've been playing recently, and it's nice. It makes things very nice. So they took away the modifier table, streamlined the basic combat mechanic. It goes a lot faster, as I understand it, but they added something back into it, but that also goes fairly fast. Okay, we'll see you at the next segment.